So let's talk about the 5 core reasons that limerence and building a relationship based off of limerence just won't work. But then, can you do the inner work and healing and change the limerent dynamic in order to make a bond that you might be building work despite it starting off from a limerent place? If you stick around to the end, I will answer that question for you and maybe give you some steps for what that could look like. So, first and foremost, the idea of building a relationship based on limerence is kind of to me like building a 3-story brick building on, a foundation of sand that's just struggling along. Like it's really hard for it to get its footing. And there's 5 core reasons for why this is the case. And again, at the end we'll really go through like what you can do instead. So, the very first one that's quite important is that often the person who is in limerence with somebody else, or if both parties happen to be in limerence, which is also a possibility, although more rare, is that there's this fear of vulnerability. Like, you may think that because you see individuals in limerence and they're in their feelings and they really want to connect, that there's this aspect of things being really vulnerable, but it's actually not the case. In fact, the person who's in limerence is often in a place of people pleasing, and people pleasing in and of itself has an element of emotional unavailability tied to it. The reason being that it's like the mask is on. Like if I'm people pleasing Bob, right? Let's just pretend. So let's say I'm people pleasing Bob. When I'm people pleasing Bob, I'm not being my authentic self. I'm not sharing my truth. I'm not sharing my true yeses and nos. I am not allowing myself to open up and be seen and be known and really build a connection based on authenticity, which means right away, it's like building that house without a proper foundation. And so we're going to see that comes back to generally bite us a little bit later on, because either we get into a relationship with somebody and then they find out later on that we're not the person that we originally presented ourselves to be because of that people pleasing dynamic. Or if you are the people pleaser in this case, you may find yourself in a tremendous amount of resentment over time to the person that you were limerent with once you get into that sort of adjustment phase and get used to dating them. The second big piece is that we tend to, when we're in limerence, build a bond that's more deeply rooted in the fantasy world than in the reality world. And I like to think of this as like fantasy bond versus reality bond. And when you're in the fantasy bond with somebody, you are thinking of all these things that will happen in the future. You are thinking of all the things you're going to do. And essentially, you are building this kind of one-way connection to this perfect idealized version of an individual. And that just comes with massive expectations, right? Like that comes with the fact that that person's going to end up letting you down in some way because you're building this perfect image of them. And on top of that, it's preventing you from seeing the person for who they truly are. I have worked with many people who are not just in limerence, but also people who are the object of limerence, right? People who somebody was in limerence with them that they were seeing or dating, or perhaps just, a friend of theirs that was in limerence with them or something of that nature. And the person who is the object of limerence often reports feeling unseen or unknown over time. They're like, well, the person says all these things about me, but those things are not necessarily true. Like, I feel like they don't actually know me. And it's because when we're projecting this ideal onto somebody, it prevents us from actually getting in there and doing the work to understand somebody, to see them, to know them, and to build that relationship dynamic on the proper foundation. Number 3, the mask is on. So I kind of touched on this earlier when I said that there's this fear of being vulnerable, but whenever we have a mask on to any degree, what you'll see is because each relationship has 6 stages to it, right? So we start off in the dating stage and eventually we make our way to the power struggle stage of relationships. In the power struggle stage, it's when we've had enough time to be around somebody and to spend around somebody that the mask inevitably drops. Generally, the power struggle stage starts around a year and a half or 2 years into the relationship. Sometimes it can start as early as 8 months or a year. But essentially, what happens is we get used to somebody, we get adapted to them. And so we start showing our truth a little bit more over time. It's almost like incrementally we become more comfortable. So if the mask has been on for so long, what ends up happening is the less authentic we are in the dating stage and the honeymoon stage, which are those 2 stages that precede the power struggle stage, the more likely we are as individuals to find ourselves in a position where somebody's shocked by who we are when we let the mask down. They're like, who is this person? And I joke about this in PDS sometimes, that I've seen so many couples, countless, countless, countless couples who would come into my office and say to me, it would be like one half of the couple, right? They come in and be like, Thais, like I was in a position where I married somebody and we really hit it off. We were dating for 6 months. I knew this person was the one. I proposed to them a year in. We got married at a year and a half into being together, got married 6 months later. And then they turned into a monster all of a sudden. And the funny part that I would think to myself is like, this is the person's perception. And I understand why that perception would be that way because they see this big change in a person. What the person isn't necessarily understanding is that there's these different stages of a relationship that take place. We start in the dating stage, then we're in the honeymoon stage, and then we go to power struggle. And the more somebody was being inauthentic or people pleasing or masked up, um, so to speak, early on, the more of a juxtaposition, the more of a big shift we see when we're on that receiving end of things. So again, it makes it really tricky for the relationship to have that longevity unless we're doing the work. And we're going to talk about what to do at the end if you want to save the limerent relationship. The number 4 one here is that we have this dynamic of when we put somebody on a pedestal, because things exist in our world along, like, this sounds funny, but because we have perception, right? We have perception as a function, like as a human being. So wherever we have a perception of something, there basically inevitably will be two sides to it. So if I can see good, then relative to good, I must see bad, right? I can't know one without the other. So because we perceive somebody as being on this perfect, beautiful pedestal when we are starting off in limerence with them, that perception means there will be a continuum of the two sides that will take place. So we will see them as all good, all amazing. But the moment this person doesn't meet your need or forgets something or doesn't meet one of the ideas you have for how they are supposed to be behaving, what ends up happening is the higher of a pedestal we put them on, the further the fall from grace, right? Because if we think they're so perfect and so all knowing or, so incredible, then when we see their human parts, which every person has their human parts, we'll be like, oh my gosh, it feels like such a betrayal, right? It can really feel like it stings. So the more that we put somebody in this pedestal oriented space, the more likely we are to actually feel betrayed by them when they don't meet our expectations, the more likely we could feel let down, disappointed, confused, hurt, resentful. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong. And this is where it's still coming back to that point of building this castle on this foundation of sand. And last but not least, before we talk about how to save the limerent relationship, is we often miss the intimacy part of truly getting to know somebody. If we're projecting all these things onto them, we're not really building that truth, right? We're not really understanding the person or allowing ourselves to be understood. And we're usually not, which could arguably be the most important part of this, we're not vetting the person. So we're in a position where we're like, this is the way this person is. And we've decided ahead of time because we've built such a deep bond in the fantasy realm rather than in reality. And so what ends up happening is as we start building this bond, we're like, well, what's going on here, right? Why is this person betraying me? Why are they not the person I thought or expected them to be? And this is going to be where you see a lot of these different challenges and dynamics take place. So, what do we do if we want it to work? What if you're in a limerent relationship now and you're really interested in the person and you're like, why is it not working? Like, what's happening? Well, one of the most important things you have to do first is you have to start understanding what is causing you to be in limerence with this person. And usually it's that they are meeting deeply unmet needs, or at least you've taken some snapshot of their behavior and you've projected that into assuming that they will meet your deeply unmet needs. So just a really clear example of this is if you felt really unseen as a child, like people weren't present with you, and then somebody makes you feel really seen and they're very present with you, and they're, even just in a short interaction, it might land in a place where you're like, wow, your subconscious mind basically communicates to you and says, you've been hungering for this for so long. And so it's like you need this magnet. You just want to like attach to that person because you need that need to be met. It felt so good. It really, arose something in you. And while this sounds counterintuitive, how we actually heal this void is we learn to meet those needs within ourselves. So whatever we're relying on with somebody that's causing us to be in limerence and causing us to put this person on a pedestal, when we can actually meet our own needs, we start feeling also capable. And then we can take this and it's like in meeting our own needs that person meets, we're like building under the foundation of that brick house, and we're putting a proper foundation down so it can stay propped up. And so from this perspective, it is super duper important to make sure that you are learning to meet those deeply unmet needs that the person represents. So you can make a list, and you can write out all the needs that this person you project in the fantasy world will meet. And then you can ask yourself, well, from 1 to 10, how much am I meeting these needs in the relationship to myself? And the answer is probably going to be quite low. And sometimes, the common things that people will fall into limerence around are being seen, heard, protected, um, included, empathized with, supported, accepted for who they are, sort of like the absence of judgment. And usually these things are things that we're actually really struggling with in our relationship to ourselves. But as we come out of that, and as we learn to empower those needs within the relationship to ourselves, like if we want to be more present with ourselves because it makes us feel seen, maybe we journal every evening for 30 minutes and check in with our inner world. Maybe we regulate our nervous system and get back in our body and feeling at home in our body through tuning into our senses more often throughout the day and being present in our reality. And so the more we do these things, the more we stop feeling limerent towards somebody, and then we can get to know them. We can have the confidence to ask questions, to share ourselves, to drop the mask. And we can really open up from that vulnerable place, take them off the pedestal, come more to a place of equality with this person, and we can really make these things work. So, if you want to do a deeper dive into limerence and actually healing it with action steps, worksheets, all that stuff, you can check out our limerence course down below for free for 7 days, by clicking the link down below in the description, and it will give you access to everything. If you cancel before the seventh day, you will never get charged. So you can check that out for free. And it also gives you access to all of PDFs in the platform if you want to scope it out, see what's going on in there, join me in a webinar. We have daily webinars at PDS for extra learning and support and community and connection and really building relationships with like-minded people. So you can jump in and check all of that out. And if you're enjoying this channel, please subscribe. Please hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily content. And if you can give it a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate that too. Thank you for watching.